Good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Let's see. So, we have three chapters to the midterm, and we also have Jim Poita coming up. So Jim Poita is in 2 weeks, and that's all we'll do that week. So what I'm going to try to do is get through probably two chapters tonight, or maybe one and a half chapters tonight. And then next week we'll do the chapter on real estate finance, which is probably the most complicated chapter that'll be on the midterm. And then the midterm will be on the 6th, which is the week after Jim Poita. Okay. Any questions about anything? Okay. So this chapter is about two things, escrow and title insurance. And they're put together because often, in fact, almost always, the company that's doing the escrow will also arrange the title insurance and vice versa. I think it would be unusual for the for you to get your own title insurance policy and then coordinate that with escrow. So it's usually one and the same. Um, and that's something though a real estate agent would advise you on. So let's talk about what is escrow, what is title insurance. There are these terms that people throw about, but I think a lot of people don't really understand what they are. Escrow is a little easier to understand than title insurance. So first of all, so one thing I want to say is this is a chapter that I think if you find it interesting and you're not sure you want to be like out there selling yourself all the time like agents have to do, escrow, title insurance, and transaction coordinators are all jobs in real estate that, number one, don't necessarily require a license, although since getting a license is not that hard, I would recommend you still get a license. But they're fields in which the job is much more like Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 kind of job. It's not, doing open houses all the time and constantly having to sell yourself. It's a regular paycheck, it's regular benefits. It's a much more stable job. Now, on the other hand, it's probably not as infinitely lucrative as successful real estate agents can find. But personally, I actually think they're both kind of interesting lines of work. So I've often thought, oh, if I didn't do what I did, I might look into like if for some reason I had to switch careers out of the blue, I think I would look into escrow and title insurance because I both find them kind of interesting. So just keep that in mind that this can be a career option. Also, if you so you've got the final interviews coming up at the end of November, beginning of December. If you interview either someone who works in title insurance or escrow, I'll give you 5 extra credit points just because I rarely see those interviews. And I actually particularly enjoy reading interviews with escrow officers and title officers just because their paths to that field are often very different. So it's just I've read lots and lots and lots of interviews with agents, and they're all interesting, but after a while they kind of hit on the same themes. I have not read very many interviews with escrow officers or title officers. So just keep that in mind. Now, a transaction coordinator is another job that's out there. And that's a job you don't need a license for. That's a job you could go out there and do now. And it's a job also, I think it might give you a sense of whether real estate is what you want to go into. So basically, you work with well, maybe not all, but you work with a number of agents within a given brokerage and you manage their projects, meaning their transactions. And so you're the one who's looking for watching the due dates. You're the ones who delivers documents. You're the one who works with escrow companies. And you do that on behalf of multiple agents because successful agents will have multiple transactions going on at the same time, and they need someone to assist them in doing that. You would be paid by the brokerage, most likely, not the individual agent, although I guess that's negotiable. But it's something to think about, and it's a relatively easy, low barrier to entry way to get into real estate. So just take it for what it's worth. And if you interview a transaction coordinator, I would also give you 5 points extra credit for that because I'm just curious to see how people get into it. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, so what is escrow? So escrow actually is a great idea. It's the idea of a neutral middle person. Okay, so all right. So let's say I'm going to buy a candy bar from Anne. Okay, and let's say she's going to sell it to me for $1 and I'm going to pay her $1, but I'm dishonest. So what she's not, but I am, and she's going to sell me the candy bar for $1. What could go wrong in that transaction? The candy bar for $1. If I'm dishonest, what could go wrong? What in terms of just physically, what might happen when I meet her to uh to pay for the candy bar? And I don't mean like I beat her up or something like that. I don't mean that. But what if I was dishonest, what might I try to do? Don't overthink this. It's easy to answer. So she's got a candy bar in her hand. I've got a dollar bill in my hand. Anybody? Any idea like what could go wrong? Yeah, Devin.
There's no one there to regulate that she didn't change her mind about raising the cost.
Oh no,
Uh,
but she's honest. She's
oh,
honest. I'm the jerk. What could I do if I was dishonest? People, this is not, I think you guys are overthinking this. Okay. Yeah, Jessica.
You give her like a fake bill or something. You cheat her
Okay.
out of it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's it. Okay. Basically, what I can do is I grab the candy bar and I run. I don't give her the dollar bill. Okay. That's what could go wrong. All right. So I steal the candy bar from her and run away. Okay. Well, here's how we could avoid that from happening. And let's flip it over. She might be dishonest. I give her the candy, or sorry, I give her the dollar bill, and then she runs off with my money, and I don't have the candy bar. So what we could do is we could hire Jessica to be our escrow officer. So first of all, it's important that the escrow officer be neutral. So I would not want like Anne's husband or Anne's daughter to be our escrow officer, just like Jessica wouldn't want anyone from my family being, or I'm sorry, just like Anne wouldn't want anyone from my family being the escrow officer. So we're going to pick Jessica. And Anne and I mutually have to agree to that. Okay. We can't force an escrow officer down each other's throats. So let's say we both agree. Here's the beauty of an escrow officer. Anne and I write instructions and we tell Jessica what to do and what not to do and when to do it. And Jessica is kind of a little bit of our slave in that she does what we tell her to do and she exercises no discretion. She doesn't use her judgment for anything. She just does what we tell her to do. And here's what we tell her is that, hey, Jessica, here's the transaction. Lance is going to pay $1 for a Snickers candy bar from Anne. Okay. Lance will deliver the dollar to you, and Anne will deliver the Snickers bar to you. When you are in possession of both the dollar bill and the candy bar, give the candy bar to Lance and give the dollar bill to Anne. That is a way for us to avoid being cheated because I don't feel comfortable giving Anne my money directly because she could then run away, just like she doesn't feel comfortable giving me the candy bar first and then I run away with my dollar bill still. So that's how escrow works. Now, that's a little overkill for a candy bar transaction, but it's not overkill for $1 million home. And so the idea of escrow is this neutral third party that works on behalf of both the buyer and the seller, and the escrow officer coordinates the transaction to avoid basically either party cheating the other party. And one reason why you feel comfortable doing a real estate transaction is because you don't have to worry about trusting the buyer or the seller. All you have to make sure is you're using like a licensed, legitimate escrow officer, and you don't have to worry about money disappearing or legal documents being transferred without your permission or that kind of thing. Okay, so that's the basic idea of escrow. Now, we're going to spend a half chapter on escrow. So you guys know that there are different elective courses you can take to get your salesperson's license and then your broker's license. Um, yeah, Kenny, were you going to say something?
Yes. So let's say if I'm going to buy purchase like a property, do I have to go through escrow? Because I think we could use a loan company or bank as an safe deposit and then negotiate with the seller
So, okay,
as in transaction
so
wise.
first of all, I would never do that. Okay. So legally, you do not have to use escrow, but you're crazy not to use escrow. Second of all, if a bank is involved, there's no way in hell they will work with you unless you use escrow because it's too complicated. So escrow is really complicated. And so so yeah, even if the buyer is paying cash, you want an escrow involved. It's totally worth it. But to answer your question, it's not legally required, but if you're financing your transaction, there's no bank that will work with you unless it's through escrow. All right. Now we'll talk about who can be escrow later. We'll get to that. Okay. Like a bank could serve in an escrow role, but in general, you want someone who's done this before, kind of thing. Okay, so it's a neutral third party, and they work at the behest of the buyer and seller. So, as I was mentioning, we're going to spend half a chapter on escrow. All right. If there are elective courses you can take to get your salesperson's license, we don't actually offer all of them. We offer the most popular ones, plus the ones you need for your broker's license. But some colleges offer a semester length course in escrow for 3 units, and that would count as one of the elective courses. Now, I got to tell you, I don't know what the hell would we talk about for 16 weeks, 3 hours a night about escrow? How much is there to learn? I don't know. I don't know. I actually have a textbook for that course. I've never read it, but I've always thought, I should look through that one of these days because I have a feeling it's probably a very hands-on class where you're like doing things and preparing closing statements. I don't know. It's not that complicated. But I will say this. Escrow officers need to be very detail oriented. So there's no degree or license you need to become an escrow officer, but you better be really good with details because you're dealing with huge amounts of money. And people who become escrow officers typically work their way up. It takes a while. And then here's another thing. Once you found an escrow officer you like, stick with them. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And your agents, if you're representing, if you're a buyer or a seller, your agents will probably have good recommendations on the escrow officers to use or the escrow officers to avoid. Now, here's the nice thing. The escrow officers can only do what you tell them to do. And by what you tell them to do, by you, I mean both sides, the buyer and the seller. So whenever instructions are given to the escrow officer, they have to be signed by both the buyer and the seller. If they're not both jointly signing the document, the escrow officer will ignore the instructions. The escrow officer will never do something unilaterally on the instructions from one side. Okay. Okay. Now, who pays for escrow? So, according to the textbook, I don't have any experience with this, is that in general, in Northern California, escrow and title insurance costs are paid for by the buyer, where in Southern California, maybe it's split. Here's my own thought of what seems fair. And in terms of deals I've worked on, this has been my experience. Title insurance is really only for the buyer. And so it makes sense that the buyer pays for that. But escrow is for both sides, so it should be equally split. So I think it's quite reasonable to say escrow costs are split. And any idea how much escrow costs are? Anyone know? And by the way, there's not like a set fee, but it's usually based on the price of the home. It's usually several $1,000s, maybe like $5,000. I don't know, for a routine transaction, something like that. Seems like a lot, but they're taking on a lot of liability. And if I wasn't working with the escrow, I would lay in bed at night a lot worried about like what's going to happen to my money or my legal documents or when am I going to get the money or that kind of thing. So escrow just gives you some peace of mind. Okay. Okay. So what are the requirements for escrow? Okay. So there's got to be signed escrow instructions. All right. You got to have a neutral party who's serving in that role. So, no bias. And what happens is in a typical real estate transaction, the buyer's job is to deliver to the escrow officer the money. Okay. And the seller's job is to deliver to escrow the legal documents, particularly disclosures, insurance information, and also grant deed. Okay, you got to have the grant deed in order to transfer ownership of the property. One other thing, if I am borrowing money from a bank to buy Kenny's home. My bank will have requirements of their own. And so they will also provide instructions to the escrow officer to tell them these are the things that have to be in place before the money should be given to Kenny. And so things that, for example, if I have a lender who's involved in this transaction, they're going to want proof that I've gotten insurance in place as of the date of close. Why? Why does the lender care if I have my own homeowner's insurance? But typically, the lender will tell the escrow, don't close this deal until insurance is in place. Why? Anyone know why? Why does the lender care about my insurance? It's in their vested interest. Anybody? Nobody? What happens to the lend? Yeah, yeah, Kenny?
Isn't it a similar case with like when you buy a car?
It is. It's the same thing. Okay. What happens to the lender's security or collateral if the house burns down in a fire, right? And so the lender wants there to be money set aside to rebuild the collateral if in fact there was, yeah, it burned down. So it's exactly like a car. Okay, that if you're getting a loan from a bank, the bank wants to make sure you have insurance in place before you take ownership. One other thing, I should have mentioned this. Other parties may also give instructions to the escrow company. And by other parties, meaning besides the buyer and seller, that's okay as long as the buyer and seller approve of those other parties giving instructions. So another, for example, would be this. If I'm buying Kenny's home and Jessica's the escrow officer, Kenny still owes money from when he bought the home 10 years ago. I want his loan paid off before I take ownership of it. And so Jessica will coordinate with Kenny's lender to make sure that that lender is paid out of the sales proceeds before Kenny gets any of the other money. Because I want to take ownership of that property without any liens on the property. Okay. Um, okay. Now, escrow instructions can be changed, and they frequently are, and that's totally fine as long as the changes are agreed to by both parties. I think one of the most common changes you see is extending escrow. Like maybe we thought escrow would close in 30 days, but there's been some problems with the lender or whatever. We need to extend it 15 more days. Generally, that's fine. Okay, just both sides have to agree to it. Okay, now getting back to Kenny's point about who can be the escrow officer, it really can be any neutral third party. Okay, so it could be a corporation, it could be an attorney, it could be a bank, it could be a real estate broker, um, but that's pretty tricky business for the real estate broker to be if a broker is involved in a transaction because they aren't necessarily disinterested. If it was a dual agency, right, where the buyer and the seller are represented by the same agent, then a broker might be able to serve as escrow. But again, still, I don't think most brokers would want to do that. Now, if I was a broker and Kenny wanted me to be the escrow in some other transaction he's doing, yeah, I might be okay with that if I'm not involved in the other transaction, and his counterpart, whether he's the buyer or the seller, has to agree to me being involved also. Okay, so how do you select an escrow company? Okay, so first of all, just know this: if you're buying a home, you're using agents and you're using lenders, you're going to use legitimate established title insurance companies because title insurance companies also provide escrow services. So we're talking about like Old Republic, Chicago Title, Stewart Title, First American Title Company. There's all these different companies out there that provide escrow services. In general, you should rely upon who the agents recommend. And even when you've got two different agents, the buyer and the seller, the buyer is the buyer's agent and the seller's agent. Everyone wants this thing to go through. So they're going to want to pick the escrow company or the escrow officer who's the most efficient. And I think what's more important is the escrow person, not the escrow company. So you're probably going to pick the company that employs the best escrow officer in your estimation. Okay. And I've worked with escrow officers that are fantastic, and I've worked with escrow officers that are crappy. And you remember the fantastic one. Well, you remember the crappy ones too, but you remember like, hey, that she was good. Let's work with her again, kind of thing. Okay. Now, escrow officers cannot give it like if you're an agent and you recommend that your client you use ABC Escrow Company. ABC Escrow Company can't give you kickbacks or referral fees. Okay. Um, and so that would be illegal. Okay. Usually the buyer's agent and the seller's agent figure this out. Now, legally, it's up to the buyer and the seller to figure this out. But 99.9% of the time, the buyer's agent and the seller's agent figure this out on behalf of their clients because most of the time the clients don't even know what this is. But I will tell you that in a transaction, the second transaction I worked on with my real estate agent, I told her in the second transaction, I really want to work with this one woman we used before. She was so good. Let's use her again. So, based upon previous experience, I had a specific recommendation. Now, in that situation, it was kind of sad. The woman that I really liked so much died. So, my agent was saying, oh, well, she's dead. So, we can't use her. But I have another recommendation, and that other person was fine. Okay. Um, but I think agents know who the good escrow officers are, and the best way for you to get referrals if you're an escrow officer is to do a good job. If you do a good job, you're going to have happy agents, and happy agents tend to refer clients, to you. Okay. Um, okay. So, what do the instructions look like? So they come in all sorts of different forms. Most buyers and sellers do not actually write the instructions. The brokerages representing the buyer and the seller prepare the instructions. And the instructions are pretty cookie cutter for most residential transactions. I've been involved in commercial transactions where the buyer's agent and the seller's agent actually wrote the instructions, and then we submitted them to escrow company. But that's a little unusual. Most of the time, the instructions are pretty cookie cutter, and the escrow company can even give you templates to use. Like, here's what works for most transactions. And one other thing you should think about, you definitely want to look at somebody else's template because there's no way you're going to remember everything that needs to be covered in an escrow transaction. So most of the time, use the escrow company's instructions as a starting point, and then modify them as you see fit, and also work with your agent on how to figure this out. But make sure that both the buyer and the seller have to sign them. So make sure that both sides are okay with what they have to say. Okay, so once you open escrow, and escrow is typically opened once a contract has been signed and the buyer has put down a 3% deposit. So I think we maybe talked about this during contract law or something, but on the one hand, it seems crazy if I'm going to buy Devin's house for $1 million, I put down a standard deposit of 3% or 30 grand. That seems insane for me to give Devin $30,000, and all he gives me is a contract saying I promise to sell Lance my home for $1 million. Why then am I willing to give him $30,000? And that's a little bit of a trick question because am I giving him $30,000? I am writing a $30,000 check. That's for sure. But am I really giving it to him? If I'm giving him a $30,000 check, that would make me very nervous. Who am I? Yeah, Devin.
You're giving it to escrow.
That's right. And I know that Devin will never see that money until he's complied with all his duties under the escrow instructions, like giving a grant deed and all of that. So that's why I feel okay, giving $30,000 because I'm not really giving it to him. I'm giving it to the escrow company for his later benefit if he also performs his side. Okay, so what are the things once you open escrow? What are the things that escrow starts to do? So why is escrow more complicated than it looks? Okay, so these are the steps. Number one, they're going to order a preliminary title report, and we'll talk about title insurance and title reports later. But it's basically they're going to order a history, a legal history of the property being sold. Okay. Next, they're going to go to the seller's lender and say, hey, so like let's say I'm buying Kenny's house. Hey, Kenny's lender. Kenny's selling the house as of November 30th. As of November 30th, how much will Kenny owe under the loan to you? Okay, and let's say he borrowed money from Bank of America, and they say, oh, as of November 30th, he'll still owe us $385,000. And they will actually calculate exactly how much he will owe as of that day. And so what that means is, of the $1 million I'm going to pay Kenny for his house, the first thing the lender is going to do is deduct 385,000. Sorry, not the lender. The escrow officer is going to do is deduct the 385,000 and send it to the lender. Okay, so that's called a payoff statement. So the seller's lender prepares a payoff statement saying, here's how much we will be owed. Okay, my lender is going to send in instructions to escrow saying, okay, escrow, here's what we need in order to fund this loan. Meaning, if you want us to wire the money to pay Kenny, here's what needs to happen. Okay, like for example, show that Lance has insurance in place. Okay, and then basically, like let's say for example, I put in my offer to Kenny's house gives me a 10-day inspection time frame. So the escrow officer is going to know that up until 10 days into escrow, I can cancel the deal if I'm unsatisfied with my inspection. But if I'm satisfied with the inspection, I'll probably say that I'm waiving contingencies, and that's something I give to escrow. And after 10 days, escrow's never gotten any indication whether I waived contingencies or not. They may reach out to Kenny and me saying, hey, did you waive the contingencies? Is this still going forward? Okay. So they're going to make sure that things are sort of following along. Okay. Then there's adjustments, adjustments and prorations, and that's calculating who is owed what. And we'll talk about that in the next slide. Transfer of fire insurance policy. So basically, escrow is going to either make sure that Kenny's existing fire insurance policy gets transferred to me as of close of escrow, or as of close of escrow, I will have a new fire insurance policy in place. All the while, Kenny's current fire insurance needs to stay in place until the close of escrow. All right. Okay, then they're going to handle the recording. Once escrow is closed, it's the escrow company that records your grant deed and puts it in the public record. And also, they will handle the issuance of a new title insurance policy. And then they will issue the funds to whoever is supposed to get them. Most of it will go to Kenny, and they'll prepare what's called a closing statement, and that will show where the buyer's money went and how it got distributed and who got paid. Okay. And then once all of that is done, then you hit closing. And closing is the date when all conditions have been satisfied, all documents have been transferred, and yeah, everything's been distributed. Okay. So that's the basics of how escrow is supposed to work. It typically takes a month. If the buyer is paying cash, it can usually take place less than a month, maybe like 2 or 3 weeks. If the buyer is got multiple lenders, it might take 45 days. It just depends. Okay. But I would say 30 to 45 days is a safe bet. Okay, for how long escrow takes. And you typically specify you specify a date it's going to close on. And if for whatever reason it can't, then you figure out a way to extend escrow. Okay, so let's talk about what are prorations. Okay, so obviously it makes sense that I'm going to deposit the money in to pay Kenny. Some of that money is going to go to pay his current lender. Okay, and then the rest goes to him. But actually, there's more than that. Okay, let's say I'm buying Kenny's property on November 15, halfway through the month. And what I'm buying from Kenny is actually a rental property. And Devin is the tenant who pays $4,000 a month, payable on the first of the month. So as of November 15th, I will become Devin's landlord. Okay. Am I owed anything from Kenny? So normally all the money goes to Kenny, but actually Kenny owes me something. What does he owe me, buddy? I mean, what does he? Yeah, Kenny.
The leftover 15 days rent.
That's right. So Devin paid $4,000 for the month of November, but I'm the landlord halfway through November. And so Kenny actually owes me $2,000 because it's not fair to let him keep the rent for the whole month of November if he didn't own it the whole month of November. Okay. Now, what about this? Kenny paid on November 1st $1,000 for insurance. And I'm gonna keep that insurance on the property for the rest of the month. I owe Kenny $500. Okay. Devin, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, that you owe him a credit.
Well, yeah. You could put it that way. That's right. Okay, because he should get credited for the amount of insurance I'm going to get for that extra half month. Okay. Then the bigger issue is property taxes. Kenny will have paid the property taxes roughly 6 months in advance. Depending on when I take ownership of that, I'm going to benefit from the fact that he paid the property taxes for a certain amount of time frame. He should get refunded the amount of property taxes he paid for the period that he no longer owns the property. Okay. So typically, what gets prorated are any rent that the tenant paid that proportionally should go to the new owner, and then any amounts paid by the current owner for insurance and property taxes. Those should be the current owner should be reimbursed for those expenses after the date of close. And so that's what the escrow company figures out for you. Now, I gave you really easy math things, $4,000 rent, November 15. It's usually not so clean like that. But here's one thing you should know. In the world of escrow, uh, every day has, every month has 30 days. Okay. Now, November really does have 30 days, but December doesn't. But if Kenny was paid rent for the month of December by Devin, and I buy the place on December 15, I get half the rent, even though I actually own it 16 days, not 15 days. And in the world of escrow, February has 30 days. Okay. So that's just a custom. It's not a law or anything, but it makes things easier to calculate. And so these are just mathematical and accounting formulas that the escrow company calculates who's owed what. One other thing, interest. Okay. So let's say this is let's say I put into escrow a $2 million. Let's say this is a big property. Okay. $2 million. And I put 2 million in. There's interest that's accruing. Okay. I should get that interest because it's my money. And so escrow would also try to figure out how to apportion that. Okay. Questions on that? I would never, by the way, give you a mathematical formula to figure out on the test. Yeah, Devin.
For all the credits and adjustments, all of that would be listed on the settlement statement, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yep. And it'll show you who gets what and where it goes. And at the end, it should all balance out. Okay. So for example, if Kenny actually owes me $2,000 for the rent you paid, that actually reduces the amount I actually have to put into escrow, right? Because instead of me paying him 2,000 and then he pays me 2,000, back, it just reduces the amount I put in. And so that's all figured out on the closing statement. All right. Okay. One other thing, similar to insurance, if lender's involved, the lender's also going to want to see a structural pest control certification report. So that is something Kenny will have to arrange as the seller. And that needs to be basically the lender's going to tell the escrow company, we will not send you the money until you tell us you have the pest control report in your hands. And it's, from a legitimate company. All right. And it's the seller's responsibility to do that. Okay. All right. And then there's fire insurance we kind of talked about. It needs to, I think we've kind of talked about this, why it's important to have, because it protects the collateral. Well, first of all, it protects Kenny's ownership while the property is sort of in escrow limbo, and it protects the lender, for me, their collateral, because they don't want the house to burn down right after I take ownership of it. So when you hear a house is in escrow, that means it's going through this process, that the buyer and seller have reached a contract and that the process is going through. Now, so if you see a house that's listed for sale and then you see it says in escrow, should you give up? Should you give up? I mean, the answer is probably it's not going to work out, but Devin, you were shaking your head. What?
There's always a chance it could fall through. Or
That's right.
yeah.
That's right. There's always it. So maybe like the inspections didn't go through, maybe the buyer couldn't get qualified, whatever. It never hurts just to call the agent who represents the seller saying, hey, if this doesn't work out, give me a call. Okay, FOMA.
Yeah, I think I was just gonna follow up with what Devin said. But sometimes I see things like the house is pending for sale. Does that also mean it's in escrow?
Yeah.
When I see like a pending over it, because since this class started, I've started like looking at, Zillow, looking at all the other real estate sites, and sometimes you will see like a house that looks affordable in quotes, compared
Mhm.
to yeah, for the
Mhm.
Bay Area. It seems it's affordable enough, and then you will just see pending or
Yeah.
yeah.
So okay, a couple things. So I would assume that means escrow. It's in escrow.
Okay.
Um, but it could also mean it could also mean it's coming on to, now that I say that, from I'm starting to second guess myself. It could also mean it's coming soon,
Mm,
meaning they're kind of giving you a sneak preview. Here's a house that's coming on the market. So I don't necessarily think pending means automatically an escrow, now that I think through it. It could mean that like it's coming. But typically that's described as coming soon. Coming soon.
okay.
They'll try to drive up some hype. But again, it's still worth putting a feeler out there because things happen and things fall through.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I haven't really seen in escrow. When I see the public listing sites, I don't see things like in escrow, is what I'm saying. Unless you're saying that is when you're having a conversation with your realtor, and then your realtor personally tells you as, their clients that okay, this is already in escrow. Because I really don't see in escrow on public
So
sites,
so
public
okay, you're making me
listings.
think, because when I think of in escrow, I'm often thinking literally of the yard sign, the wooden sign, and then it says on top in escrow.
Okay.
So you're right. Online, it may be just more commonly referred to as pending. But here's one other thing. Sometimes also agents will pull, if it is an escrow, they will pull it down because they don't want phone calls from people like you saying, hey, the house, they'd rather just
Yeah.
like, I don't want to deal with this right now. And if it falls through, I'll just put it back up. Whereas the
Okay.
yard sign isn't so easily to remove. So maybe that's why you see more escrow. But I think it's smart to put pending because you just never know when something might fall through. It's good to at least have like a backup plan of potential buyers who might be interested. All right.
All right.
Good question.
Thanks.
Yep. Kenny,
So basically, when you see the pending side, it means you have a chance. So
a
if I
small
would
chance, but yeah.
right,
Yeah.
what uh if I increased uh the other offers amount? Isn't that seller can kind of shake or give me
You're saying
offer?
you're offering more than the buyers that the contract is currently worth?
Right, right.
Well, no, because then that seller would get sued.
Oh,
Yeah, no, no. Because once the seller agrees with the buyer, that's it. That's the contract. They can't change their mind unless they try to
um,
negotiate an exit from that other contract or something.
no, I mean, when since like the sign says pending, and then the other buyer and the seller did not meet with the agreement and or closer, can can they close that buyer's case the case and then ship it over to mine and
Well,
then
yeah, they would just start over.
Right, right, right.
But they would start over in a quicker way because you're already waiting to make
Mm,
a bid. Does that make sense?
yes.
Okay. Good questions. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example of a really weird escrow I was involved with. And it shows the value of a good escrow officer and the harm that a bad escrow officer can cause. So it's a little bit of a weird situation. So I'm going to draw what was going on. Okay. Okay. So okay. So what this is, just bear with my art. This is a railroad track. Okay. This is a station, and then this is more railroad tracks. Okay. So this was all up in Sonoma County. Okay. And so we represented, it actually exists now. There's a commuter train in Sonoma, Marin County called SMART, Sonoma Marin Area Rapid Transit. It's like Caltrain, but just for the North Bay. And we represented SMART when they bought all the railroad tracks to they basically bought the railroad tracks from Union Pacific Railroad, an old school railroad company, so that we could take their tracks and put a commuter railroad line. Okay. Not only were we buying the tracks, we were buying old station property. And this was a station. Okay. And we could build new stations for commuters, to park their cars and hop on the train. So here's the problem. We bought like 40 miles of railroad tracks and stations, and that was all great. But there was one sticking point, and it was this station in downtown Santa Rosa. Okay. And the sticking point was this: the land at the station was contaminated. And you, as a buyer, never want to own contaminated land because the laws are that whoever owns the land has to clean it up, not who polluted the land. So even though you may have bought it and you're innocent, you're still liable. But we still wanted to buy everything else. So here's one thing we could do. We could just say, hey, Union Pacific, we'll buy everything from you once you clean up that station. Okay, because we're not going to clean it up. The problem with that is that could take a few years. And in the meantime, the price for those railroad tracks could just go up, 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 up. So our client wanted to buy the railroad tracks now, and they had the money to buy it now, but they didn't want to buy that one little parcel. So this was all negotiated before I got involved. What the negotiation is that our client said, how about this? We buy everything except Santa Rosa Station. But we put into escrow the funds to buy the Santa Rosa Station once it's cleaned up. And you, Union Pacific, you tell the escrow company once it's cleaned up. And so what the escrow instructions were that we were buying everything except the station, Santa Rosa, but we put the money that would account for Santa Rosa Station into escrow. And the escrow instructions said, once Union Pacific Railroad has government approval to clean up the property, once you've gotten that letter, escrow officer, give the money to Union Pacific and give the grant deed for the station to our client. So this was a way for us to tie up the station without losing the opportunity to buy everything else. So we bought everything else except for the station, but we put the money for the station in escrow. And the assumption was, we'll in 2 or 3 years, once the station is cleaned up, and that's been proven to us and to escrow, we will tell escrow, hey, escrow, give the money to Union Pacific now and give us the remaining documents, okay, for the Santa Rosa Station. So it was a way for us to tie up the property, and it was a way for Union Pacific to be guaranteed to get money for the property. They knew they just had to satisfy a condition before they could touch the money. Okay. Question. It's complicated, but question. Yeah, Devin.
Was that money allocated or distributed separately based on the contingency?
Yes. So I'm just going to make up figures here, okay? Because I don't remember what the word. Let's say we pay, let's say the railroad, everything we paid was $40 million, and of that 40 million, 1 million was the Santa Rosa station. So what the escrow said is, escrow, give Union Pacific Railroad right now $39 million and hold back that $1 million. But Union Pacific knows they're going to get that $1 million once they clean up the property. Okay. So the assumption was that, so that's exactly what happened, that the ownership of the railroad was transferred over fully to our client, except for the station, and 39 million went to Union Pacific Railroad fully, and 1 million was just held back in escrow. So all that's being held back in escrow is the grant deed and the money for Santa Rosa. Okay. So this happened in 1996. Okay. I wasn't even in law school. So this all happened before I even went to law school. And my understanding from talking to the people who were involved was that it was going to be resolved by like 98 or something like that. Well, it didn't get resolved for, I don't really know why, until 2003. And that's when my boss came into my office saying, hey, we just got notification we can close escrow, finish it, finish the job. So by then I was like a young attorney and I'm like, what is this? So there was a big learning curve. I had to figure out what's going on here. But basically what my job was actually easy. All my job was just to verify that they had cleaned the station and then to work with the attorney for Union Pacific Railroad to close escrow. And the attorney for Union Pacific Railroad wanted to close escrow. We wanted to close escrow. It's a big happy family. We're all in conjunction here. So here's the problem we ran into. So the attorney for Union Pacific Railroad was a woman named Sherry, and Sherry and I got along really well. Escrow was opened in 1996. This matter didn't finish up until 2003. What do you think is going to happen when Sherry and I call the escrow company and say, hey, remember this deal you did 7 years ago? Can we close escrow? Is it understandable that they're going to be like, what? Like, who is this? So, first of all, it took a while for me and Sherry to get up to speed. Then we had to call the escrow company and try to say, like, yeah, you worked on this 7 years ago. We actually paid you to work on this. We're ready to close this deal. So, for the escrow company, it was all brand new to them, too, in a way. And here's the other thing. We already paid the escrow company for this transaction in 1996. What incentive financially do they have to close this transaction? None. Okay. No, legally they have to close it. They have a legal obligation. But are they going to put this on the front burner? Like, oh, let's get this done. No, they have much more active things where they're waiting for money. And so this one was low priority. Not only that, the escrow officer who was handling this was a guy named Richard, and he went by Dick. And that was a very appropriate name for him the more I worked with him. He was a real dick. So he basically could care less about us or this transaction. He wouldn't return phone calls, or he'd say, oh, I need to look into that. And he would, he was just kind of this old timer guy, very old school kind of guy. And it just was getting frustrating. And Sherry and I, we weren't in disagreement. We wanted the same thing. We were both equally aggravated with this guy. And I have to say, so there was one time we called him to kind of read him the riot act, like, come on, this has been dragging on for months. And this is where inadvertently Sherry and I got into good cop, bad cop routine. Anyone know what I'm talking about? It's a negotiating tactic, good cop, bad cop. She and I didn't plan it this way, but it's the way it worked out. Anyone know what I mean by that? Where it's like one of us is a jerk and one of us is his friend. So what I saw Sherry do was, so I was on the phone, like reading him the riot act. I'm not good dealing with passive aggressive people. And this guy was passive aggressive. Sherry got on the phone and churned on feminine charm and was just flirty with him. And, oh, Richard, and oh, and that finally got things moving. Now, after we got off the conference call with Richard, she told me she felt like She prostituted herself, okay, to get him to, move, but things started moving. So we felt like, okay, it's finally going to happen. And then another month went by, and we're like, oh no, we have to call and find out like what's going on. So we called the escrow company, like, come on. And we said, okay, can we speak to Richard? And the receptionist is like, can you hold on? We're like, yeah. And then someone got on the phone and they said, you were looking for Richard? And we said, yeah, it's for this deal. And they said, well, we don't know how to tell you this, but Richard died. And so not long after we talked to him, he had had a heart attack, or I don't know what happened to him, but he died. And so the one person who knew the most about this whole transaction died. So we had to start all over again with a new escrow officer. She was professional, she was fine, everything got done. But this went on for months, and it should have gone on for 2 weeks. We should have gotten this done in 2 weeks. Um, so that kind of shows you how escrow can be used. Escrow is a wonderful thing because it's just a way to insert trust between two parties who may not trust each other. And it's like having a referee between two parties. So you can structure it in different ways. And had Richard been a reasonable person, this would have worked really well. But like, for example, would I have recommended that you work with Richard? Like, no way. Okay. Um, and if you let me